Isso não é um lançamento de notebook. Esse é o seu lançamento. Os aí PCs da Lenovo com processadores Intel Core Ultra 9 aprendem com você e personalizam as necessidades do seu negócio, permitindo que os seus dados fiquem sempre protegidos. Essa é uma das várias soluções para ajudar você a ser mais você. Saiba mais em www.lenovo.com/IA para você.
Hey, today on CityCast Philly, Republicans are now completely in control of the federal government, but here in Philly, Democrats completely control the local government. The result? So far, pretty chaotic. Today, we're going to try to understand what awaits us when it comes to politics in this country and city. Brian Rosenwald is a scholar in residence at the University of Pennsylvania and writes a Substack called The World According to Brian. This is our weekly politics episode. It's Wednesday, February 5th. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Brian, we've been talking on the show about the incredible amount of impact that President Donald Trump, who is now back in office, has had in this is his third week. He's already made such an impact on the lives of Philadelphians. Let's go down the list. First, he released the head of the Proud Boys chapter here in Philly. He briefly froze federal spending, which caused a lot of confusion. And then there's been what seems like this stepped up enforcement by immigration officers, which has Philadelphians in fear. People aren't showing up to work. Have you ever seen a new president, or in this case, a second-term president, have such a direct effect on people in local communities in such a short period of time like Trump has?
Well, I think that a lot of this is Donald Trump. He's a unique figure.
So the answer is no.
No, I mean, first of all, especially at the new beginning of an administration, there is always a little bit of a lag as they find their footing. Now, obviously, this is an unusual situation. Grover Cleveland is the only other president who served a term, then was out of office for a term, and then came back into office. So they had more of a blueprint than the average president does when they start. But there's also, something about Donald Trump that he ignores the element of the presidency that is supposed to be focused on bringing people together. When you look at his reaction to the plane crash last week, where he, was talking about DEI and blaming it on things, like instead of binding people's wounds and bringing people together, Donald Trump is perfectly happy to divide because he knows what his base wants, and it's about delivering for his base. And the things that have disrupted people's lives in Philadelphia, my guess is if you polled Trump voters, most, though not all, would be happy with it. That's what they wanted. That's what they voted for. That's what the polling has showed us is, popular with a majority, albeit not a particularly large majority. So I think that he is kind of innately attuned to where is my base? Where do my voters want me to take things? And he doesn't mind being divisive. He doesn't mind getting, headlines about disrupting people's lives. And he believes that the presidency, he believes that politics, he treats it just like he treated The Apprentice. There needs to be a constant flow of drama. And any time that the news cycle kind of quiets down, that's when Donald Trump jumps in, whether it's the after midnight Truth Social posts, whether it's, late on a Friday night. He did this in the first term all the time, late on a Friday night, or August, when politics usually slows down, where he says something incendiary or he just ignites a whole new news cycle. That's Donald Trump.
Okay, but in this case, going from the election to now, like, we're talking about the lives of immigrants and federal workers. Like, people were freaked out. They were scared. It was chaotic. Can you explain how federal policy changes have affected Philadelphians so far?
Well, he has promised, like, his number one issue from day one has been immigration. And that means deporting as many undocumented migrants as they can. And, it's been reported that he was not happy in the first couple of days that they were not deporting enough immigrants, that they were not reaching, for whatever quotas he wanted, that he kind of ratcheted them up. And, for all the promises about, well, we're going to focus on those who've committed crimes, you can't hit targets without, focusing on those who are not just criminals. So this was a top priority. And the other thing with him is he's kind of convinced that there's this deep state thing, that the bureaucracy and the federal workers are out to get him.
Okay, so Brian, my question now is there a counter to these policies that we've seen in these first 3 weeks? Is this when the Democrats can come in and step up? And when I say that, or when I ask that, I'm thinking of Senator John Fetterman, who we have seen talking with President Trump. You can't miss him. He wears hoodies and shorts on the Senate floor. He's one of the state's lone Democratic senators who's been progressive, had progressive positions on criminal justice reform, legalizing weed. I mean, Fetterman has been down at Mar-a-Lago to hang out with Trump, talk with Trump. Is that a good tactic to counter what we've seen in these early weeks?
I think Fetterman's a fascinating figure because if you look at his voting record, there's a scholarly metric called DW Nominate that people don't need to know the specifics of how it's calculated or anything like that, but it ranks legislators, senators, and congressmen from furthest left to furthest right. So in the Senate, it's 1 to 100.
Okay.
And Fetterman was the 14th most conservative Democrat in the last Congress. So he was about more liberal than 30% of the Democrats roughly, or thereabouts. And was, so he wasn't the most conservative guy. And on all of the big votes, he voted with his party. He's one of those guys where if you look at his record, he's actually pretty liberal. And they asked him, I forget what the media appearance was that asked him, are you going to switch parties? The View asked him. That's right. It was on The View.
He was very clear.
He basically said, I'd be a rotten Republican because I'm pro-LGBTQ rights. I'm pro-choice. I'm, pro-immigration. And I think sometimes we lose sight of it because he kind of delights in poking the base and the left and the activist class in the face.
Yeah, the critics, Uh-huh.
He likes to give them a hard time in terms of what he says.
Right, because they've accused him of being too cozy with Republicans or kissing up to Trump.
Right, but I think that we have to understand what John Fetterman is. Obviously, Pennsylvania is an incredibly diverse state. And I think in many ways, John Fetterman represents the non-Philadelphia part of the state. He's not someone who is his understanding of people in Pennsylvania, of his constituents. I think hews more towards some of the small towns, the Rust Belt cities like Scranton and Erie and places like that. I think that that's more in line with what he sees in the way of where voters are. And so he's trying to talk to them. I think he has a sense of the fact that there's a lot of Pennsylvanians, a lot of people who were once Democratic voters who have soured on the party, and he'd like to bring them back. And basically, I think what he understands, and I think it's something the party has to understand better, is where the Democratic activist base is, where the Democratic primary voter is not necessarily where the rest of the country is on a lot of issues and where the rest of the voters are. And I think he has an understanding of this is about building a big tent party. This is about building a party that can get to 50% plus one and win elections. And so he is, I think, trying to prod the party in that way. And as you mentioned, he's got this image of, he certainly doesn't look like your classic politician. I think he was wearing shorts to the inauguration. He is not, he doesn't dress like a politician. He doesn't talk like a politician. He doesn't act like a politician. He went on Joe Rogan, who is obviously a figure who's not real popular with Democrats, with the political class of Democrats, because he says, that's where there are voters there and we need to be able to talk to them. And so he's doing things that I think, piss the base off and anger the base, even though he is, he's got a sense of like, let's broaden the party, let's make the party more welcoming, let's grow the party because we've gotten too
Right.
narrow. And so
Right.
there's going to be this tension with John Fetterman between where the activists are and where he is, I think, all the way through. Now, the risk that you run if you're Fetterman is what happened to Kirsten Sinema, the senator from Arizona, who also on the majority of issues was with the Democratic Party, and yet she became persona non grata and could not have won another primary and ended up retiring because she had angered the activists so much. But I don't think Fetterman has risked doing that. I saw polling on him, I guess it was last week, that he had only dropped off a couple of points with Democrats, but had gotten much more popular with Republicans. So I think that he kind of knows what he's doing politically. And I think that what's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen is he's going to be willing to work with Donald Trump when Donald Trump does things that Fetterman thinks are popular. And when Trump does things that Fetterman thinks are unpopular, that are an assault on his values, that are an assault on democratic values, that he's going to speak up. The other thing I do think he's doing is that he's not going to engage in every news cycle of outrage. If, oh, Trump said this,
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to say, well, I'm not going to work with this guy on this other issue because he said that.
Right. Right. We'll pause right there and we'll be back after this break. Okay, let me step in real quick. So basically what you're saying, I mean, like, it is helpful or it's a part of politics to have friends across the aisle is what you're saying, right?
I'm saying, well, first of all, that is how politics used to work. And I think it was much more effective. They got more things done when politics worked like that, where you had people who could be, the story I always like to go back to, and you can tell I'm a historian when I say this. Everett Dirksen was the Senate Republican leader in the 1960s, and he used to call over to the White House to President Johnson's aides and say, you tell Lyndon I am going to cut him up on the floor today. I'm really going to go at him, and then I'll be over for drinks at 5 o'clock. There was a sense of like, yeah, we would throw insults at each other. Yeah, we would criticize each other, but that we had friendships. You go back to our past president, Joe Biden. He was very close to Strom Thurmond, the former segregationist senator who served from South Carolina for like a half century when Biden and Thurmond were chairman and ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. They played racquetball together. Biden's sense was, look, this is who the voters have given us on the other side. It might not be who I would choose, but to get anything done, you have to work with people. And I think Fetterman has some of that ethos, but I don't even think it's that so much as him saying, I think that the Democratic Party needs to shift, that the Democratic Party is in a bad place in terms of where the electorate thinks they are. The electorate thinks they've gotten too extreme. And he is trying to talk to that voter, maybe that voter who was an Obama Trump voter, or even someone who was a Biden Trump voter, someone who voted against Trump in 2020 and voted for him in 2024. John Fetterman is trying to talk to that voter and say, we are not what you think we are. We are a party that is willing to hear your concerns about things. We're willing to work with Donald Trump to make your life better if that's what it takes. And we hear you. We hear you about what you think about our party. We just lost the House, the Senate, and the White House. That is sending us a message. And I think that's going to anger a lot of the activists. It's going to anger primary voters. It's going to anger people on the left. But I think that what you're going to find is that, John Fetterman's where the 60 or 65% of the electorate is on issues, even if the 35 or 40% that is against them on that issue, on those issues, is the Democratic base.
What's your take of Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro? Because he's been outspoken, especially in regards to Trump's temporarily freezing federal spending.
I think that they're going to do a lot of very similar things. I think Shapiro and Fetterman, first of all, they're fascinating because they're rivals and very, very different stylistically, right? Fetterman, as you said, this big lumbering guy in the hoodie and the pair of shorts, gym shorts. Shapiro is your classic Philadelphia suburbs politician with the shirt and tie on. And yet they both have this sense of where the center of the electorate is, of where, how can we grow the party? And they understand that Americans want their politicians to put aside their differences and work together in areas that will make life better for them. And Shapiro tries to do a lot of the same thing. He just put out some energy proposals that are things that I could see him working with Trump's Department of Energy and Department of the Interior on things that he thinks, I think, are popular. It's going to be very different stylistically. It might be different in terms of what issues they work with Trump on, because obviously a governor has a slightly different perspective than a U.S. senator. And there are going to be things like the spending freeze that bring them together, where Fetterman and Shapiro are with all the other Democrats opposing them. But what I think you're going to see both men do throughout Trump's term is to try to triangulate, to use a Bill Clinton era term, where they try to work with Trump where it's possible and where they feel like it's not offensive to their own values. Because if they do that, they can send the signal to the electorate that they are a moderate, that they are someone who puts solutions and making people's lives better ahead of partisanship and ideological, shibboleths and being ideologues and being ideological warriors. And that they're also going to know when it's time to fight back, when it's time to say, no, Donald, no, Mr. President, I am going to oppose you strenuously and do everything I can to fight you. And again, it'll look a little bit different because Shapiro is a governor and Fetterman's a senator. In Fetterman's case, it may be what he votes for versus what he votes against. In Shapiro's case, it may be what he says. It may be what he does, where he cooperates with Trump in terms of state and federal cooperation and where he fights back. But I don't think you're going to see Josh Shapiro be one of these governors, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois or Gavin Newsom of California, who's like, I'm going to lead the charge against Trump. I'm going to Trump-proof my state. You're not going to hear Josh Shapiro say that. This is a purple state.
So that's from the state level, but back here in Philly, very blue, we haven't heard much from Mayor Sherrell Parker so far when it comes to Trump. Her predecessor, Mayor Jim Kenney, though, do you remember when he called Trump a punk during his first term because of his immigration policies back then? But after an ICE raid last week in North Philly, Mayor Parker hasn't said anything. So what's going on here?
Well, I think that Mayor Parker is a little bit more of a moderate than is Jim Kenney. And I think that her instincts are a little bit more moderate. And I think that she's kind of feeling her way and trying to figure out where are the voters. Again, I think she's looking at the same polling that the federal politicians, the Fettermans of the world are looking at, that shows that the electorate has swung far to the right on immigration, and not just Republicans and independents, but also Democrats have swung to the right on immigration. And I could get into why I think that's happened and what has led to it, but I think that she's being cautious. I think that she's trying to feel her way out here and not let the voices of her base, not let the voices of the activists drag her in a direction that is actually not where most of the voters are. I think you will see her speak up as we go over time. I think if you see any indication that what Trump is doing is bothersome to her electorate, then I think that she is going to speak up. I think that they will do things, that ICE will do things, that some of the immigration stuff will happen, that she will speak up on that. But I think that she's being cautious because Democrats writ large, especially on immigration, have had this epiphany since the election of, I think most of them are personally horrified by a lot of what Trump stands for on immigration, a lot of his rhetoric, a lot of what he's doing. But the line that you see a lot of Democrats all over the country going for is, we can treat immigrants with dignity. We can be for more immigration. We can, certainly not embrace the rhetoric that Trump uses, the dehumanizing, ugly rhetoric, the bigotry, but that we can still enforce our laws, that we're still entitled, to enforce the laws. And they're trying to get back to almost where Barack Obama was on immigration. If you look at some of his speeches, they sound very different than where Democrats have been in the Trump and Biden eras. And I think they're trying to get back to that of saying, we want people to come here. We welcome immigrants. America is a country of immigrants. They make our communities better. They make our country richer. They make our economy better. But we do have laws, and people need to follow the laws, and we're going to enforce the laws. Like, I think they're trying to find a balance that hits the sweet spot of where is the electorate.
Very interesting. And we will definitely keep our eyes on all of it. Brian, thank you so much for joining me this week on CityCast Philly.
Trinae, it's always great being with you, and I'm sure Trump is going to give us plenty to talk about in the weeks, months, and years to come.
All right, well, you got to come back.
Definitely, anytime.
Just as a reminder, there's a scheduled town hall tonight at 7 p.m. about the plane crash near Roosevelt Mall. That's happening at S. Salas Cohen School. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. If you enjoyed our weekly politics chat, tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with a recap on the Tasties. You don't want to miss that. Talk to you then. Bye.